my wish for the world, that peace will find its way to every boy and girl. This is the time for harmony. Let love be the song that everybody sing. Rejoice, joyful Lord, ring the bell and raise your voice. Let there be peace on earth, let there be peace on earth. Live a light and let it shine, let it shine, shine, shine. Let every word be heard, let there be peace on earth. I hear the sweetest sound, the sound of hope to come. Together we could bring goodwill to everyone. Let's start with you, let's start with me. Let every nation rise and sing this melody. Ring the air with joyful noise, ring the bell and raise your voice. Let there be peace on earth, let there be peace on earth. Live your life and let it shine, let it shine, shine, shine. Let every voice be heard, let there be peace on earth. Oh, 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 oh. Peace on earth. Oh, 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 oh. Fill the air with joyful noise, ring the bell and raise your voice. Let there be peace on earth, let there be peace on earth. Live your life and let it shine, shine, shine. Let every voice be heard, let there be peace on earth. Let every voice be heard, let there be peace on earth.
Good morning, everyone. The ceremony will be commencing in 10 minutes. I will take this opportunity to let you know the bathrooms are located in the building beside you and in the front garden. Thank you. Selamat pagi para hadirin sekalian. Upacara ini akan mulai dalam 10 menit. Saya menggunakan kesempatan ini untuk menyampaikan bahwa kamar kecil terletak di bangunan di samping Anda atau di area taman di depan. Terima kasih.
Nella fantasia esisto vento caldo e anche la notte meno scura. Io sogno d'anime e sogno sempre libero. Come nuvole
Good morning once again. Please find your seats as the ceremony will commence shortly. Water stations can be found at various points around the consulate, including in the back garden here and the memorial garden at the front. If at any stage during the ceremony you require assistance, please alert a staff member. And finally, a reminder to turn your phones to silent before the ceremony commences. Thank you. Selamat pagi lagi. Mohon untuk mengambil tempat duduk karena upacara akan segera dimulai. Air minum disediakan di beberapa tempat sekitar konsulat, termasuk di area taman belakang ini dan di Memorial Garden di depan. Jika selama upacara berlangsung Anda memerlukan bantuan, mohon memberi tahu staf kami. Dan yang terakhir, saya mengingatkan untuk mematikan ponsel Anda sebelum upacara dimulai. Terima kasih. Please rise for the Australian and Indonesian national anthems. Hadirin dimohon berdiri untuk lagu kebangsaan Australia dan Indonesia. Please be seated. Selamat pagi. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for being here in Bali on this solemn day. My name is Amelia Eckel, Consul at the Australian Consulate General in Bali, and I will be your Master of Ceremonies today. Thank you very much to the Pagu Yuban Seni Sangat Tiga Bali for the beautiful gamelan playing, to the Bali Community Choir for your singing just now and earlier this morning, and to the Soulmate Acoustic who will play later today. Thank you for giving your time to participate in this ceremony. As you will see in your booklets, today we will hear addresses by Australian and Indonesian leaders, as well as some reflections by those impacted by the attacks 20 years ago. There will then be a minute's silence, followed by the laying of wreaths and flowers at the memorial in our front garden. Finally, I will invite you to join a morning tea with an opportunity to sign a condolence book and contribute to our painting board. I would now like to introduce the Australian Consul General in Bali, Ms. Anthea Griffin, and invite her to give some welcoming remarks.
Thank you, Amelia. Good morning, selamat pagi, assalamualaikum, namo buddhaya, salam kebajikan, shalom, om swastiastu. Before I commence, may I thank Priest Jero Mangku Wayan Subamia, who conducted the Balinese ceremony that many of you observed as you entered the consulate grounds. Thank you, Pak Jero Mangku. Sebelum saya mulai, izinkan saya mengucapkan terima kasih kepada Bapak Jero Mangku Wayan Subamia yang telah memimpin upacara Hindu Bali yang banyak dari Anda saksikan saat memasuki halaman konsulat. Terima kasih, Pak Jero Mangku. I would like to begin by welcoming all of you who have joined us here today. I particularly acknowledge the survivors, first responders, volunteers, and families of the victims of the 2002 Bali bombings, both those of you who have travelled here and those from our community in Bali. Thank you for making the journey here. I would also like to acknowledge Australia's Assistant Minister for Foreign Affairs, the Honourable Tim Watts MP, the Honourable Luke Gosling MP, Wakil Gubernur Bapak Profesor Chakoda Oka Arthur Ardana Sukawati, the Australian Ambassador of Indonesia, Penny Williams, the representative of Kapolda Bali, Australian Federal Police Deputy Commissioner Brett Pointing, members of the Diplomatic and Consular Corps, and other members of the government and community here in Bali. Today we gather to mark 20 years since the Bali bombings. We remember and mourn all those who lost their lives, including 88 Australians and 114 others from countries around the world. We honour the many who are injured or who have suffered as a result of the attacks. We come together to honour our friends and colleagues, our families and our loved ones, those we lost, those who were injured, and those who provided life-saving assistance. It is a hard day for all here in Bali and around the world. Today and on all days, we remember them. As the Australian Consul General in Bali, I witness every day the depth of our relationship with Indonesia. I see the solidarity forged by the community in Bali and the Australians who volunteered side by side. On that terrible night 20 years ago, Australians and Indonesians alike undertook remarkable rescue efforts, and our countries drew closer than ever before. We came together, along with so many countries of the world, with a unified response. Rescuers ran towards the bomb site, volunteers extended their hands, medical staff worked through the night and for many nights to come. Thank you to the first responders, volunteers and organisations who helped all, regardless of nationality. Thank you for your bravery and your selflessness. Thank you to the staff working at the consulate in 2002, including former Consul General Ross Tyso and Vice Consul David Chaplin and their team. To our locally engaged staff, some of whom still work at the Consulate in Bali and the Embassy in Jakarta, who led teams of volunteers in their tireless response. To our Australian Federal Police and Australian Defence Force colleagues and their Indonesian counterparts, thank you for your service. We also honour all those who have faced other terrorist events, such as the survivors of the Jakarta Embassy bombing who are here today. Now, here in Bali, 20 years later, we gather as one community. Let us come together to remember and to heal. Thank you. Terima kasih. Waalaikumsalam. Namo Buddhaya. Salam kebajikan. Shalom. Om Santi, Santi, Santi Om. Thank you.
Thank you, Consul General Griffin. I now welcome Australia's Assistant Minister for Foreign Affairs, the Honourable Tim Watts MP, to the lectern to give his address.
Bapak, Ibu, Yongtim, Hormat, Selamat pagi. Distinguished guests, survivors, families, first responders. It is an honour to be speaking before you all. I know many of you have travelled a very long way to be here today. I would also like to acknowledge some of our provincial government representatives who are joining us this morning, including the Vice-Governor of Bali, Bapak Chokkoda Oka Aritha Aridna Sukawati, Chief of Bali Provincial Police, Inspector General Bapak Putu Jayandanu Putra, and other representatives from government and local organisations. Today marks 20 years since terrorists attacked Paddy's Pub and the Sari Club in Kuta, Bali. What should have been a typical October Saturday night in Bali, ringing with music and laughter, turned into something terrible. 2 bombs, detonated 20 seconds apart, shattered the night. 202 people died. Another 209 were injured. Among those killed, 88 Australians, 38 Indonesians, and citizens of more than 20 other nations. Sports teams celebrating the ends of their seasons. Families and friends on holiday. People simply passing by on their way into town or back home to their families. That terrible night, amidst fire and smoke and rubble, brave first responders, official and unofficial, saved many lives. Hotel managers sheltered survivors. Traffic wardens searched through devastation, carrying out the dead and the injured. Doctors and nurses administered critical care at hospitals in Bali, in Darwin, and in Perth. Officials, including from the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, the Australian Defence Force, and the Australian Federal Police, worked alongside Indonesian counterparts, epitomising the spirit of cooperation which sits at the heart of the relationship between our two nations. As the sun rose over the wreckage the next morning, volunteers from the local community, unprompted, turned up to help the official efforts, phoning hospitals and hotels to search for the missing and the injured. Australian and Indonesian officials together worked tirelessly to help the victims and their families. 20 years later, the pain is still felt. That night remains seared into the national memories of Indonesians, Australians, and so many others. We will always remember those 202 innocent people, most under the age of 40, the youngest just 13 years old. Today, we pay tribute to those who died. We stand with the survivors, relatives, and families and support them at this time. And we remember the valour and the quiet courage of those who saw the worst of humanity and responded with the best. So many words have been spoken, so many tears shed over that night. And we know that for those who lived through it and for those who lost loved ones, none of it will ever be enough. Nothing can bring back the lives and the innocence that we lost that day. But 20 years later, we can say that terror failed. As Foreign Minister Wong said, out of that loss and tragedy came strength and courage, a defiance in the face of terror. In the wake of the attacks, Australians and Indonesians joined together. We've worked together to respond to transnational crime and terrorism and to build positive links between our two multicultural, multi-faith societies. We are connected by culture, by trade, and through cooperating on global challenges. After the tragedy 20 years ago, Australia and Indonesia established the 12 October Australian Memorial Centre Burns Unit at the Prof. Nora Hospital. The Prof. Nora Hospital now works closely with the Royal Darwin Hospital and the National Care and Trauma Response Centre in Australia. It's just one example of how our countries came together through this tragedy. Today, our two nations are closer than ever, bound by a common grief and bound by a fierce conviction that terror should not be allowed to win, that humanity can outlive fear. An attack that was meant to make us smaller and more afraid has instead made us stronger and more connected than ever before. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said that although their bombs worked and they inflicted the carnage that they desired, they could not achieve their aim. They tried to instill fear and to strike at the joy of a free people. But they did not take that away from us, and instead reminded us of everything that we value and the need to protect it more than ever before. Today, we remember the lives that were taken and the physical and mental devastation of survivors and their families. Here and across Australia, we commemorate everyone who is still affected by this tragedy 20 years on. As Prime Minister Albanese said, they struck at the friendship between us. They struck at freedom. They struck at the joy of a free people, and they struck at love. But we remain. But we remain.
Thank you, Assistant Minister Watts. I would now like to introduce the Vice Governor of Bali, Bapak Profesor Djokodo Oka Arta Adana Sukawati, to deliver an address on behalf of the Governor of Bali. Thank you.
Good morning. Om Swastiastu. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera untuk kita semua. Shalom, Namo Buddhaya, Rahayu. His Excellencies, Assistant Foreign Minister, Mr. Watt, His Excellencies, Ambassador of Australia, Mrs. Williams, His Excellencies, Consul General Australia, Kapolda Bali atau yang mewakili, Law and Human Ministry, Kanwil Kumham Republik Indonesia, Diplomatic of Court, and the family of His Trust, Honorable distinguished guests. First of all, let us pray to God Almighty, because with His blessing and His grace, we can be here together to celebrate the 20th memorials of the Bali bombing. Sincere words and support may extend to all the families of the victims of the Bali bombings tragedy. I hope these commemorations become an important thing for both Indonesian and Australian government and society. I invite all components of Balinese society to use today's commemorations as a momentum to reflect together that this tragedy must be remembered, not to grieve the wounds within us or to grow rugged, but to take the wisdom for the common good for all of us. Bali is already well known as the world's best tourism destination. This is proven by the various awards that Bali has won in the tourism sectors. Tourists and the lives of Balinese peoples are also the biggest victim of the consequence of the bomb attacks. But the Balinese people have proven their success after bombing 20 years ago by showing that we are not a nation or society that easily loses confidence, and it is a society that always survives in the face of disasters and adversity, including terrorism attacks. Distinguished guests, we must not be intimidated by the acts of tourism. Tourism cannot be fought alone. We must do it together. Therefore, I hope that today's commemorations will bring even close relations between Indonesia and Australia in fighting tourism crimes and other forms of cooperations. Once again, I extend my deepest sympathy to the victim of the entire families of the victim of the Bali bombing tragedy. Thank you very much. Om Santi, Santi, Santi Om.
Terima kasih, Bapak Wakil Gubernur. I now welcome Australia's Ambassador to Indonesia, Ms. Penny Williams, PSM, to the lectern. Ambassador Williams will be reading a statement by Australia's Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese.
Good morning. A message to us from the Prime Minister. Today, 2 decades on, we recall that terrible night in October 2002. We remember everyone who was lost, everyone who was hurt, and everyone who has carried their loss ever since. What happened in Bali was, for most of us, beyond imagining. 202 lives lost, including 88 Australians. They were not combatants in war. They were gathered in a place of joy, families and teammates, lovers and friends, visitors and locals alike. Today, we think of the dreams never fulfilled, the life milestones never reached, and the moments of love never known. We think of the people of Indonesia who felt our great pain that night, just as we felt theirs. We also think of the brave individuals who ran towards the terror to do what they could to help. We recall how from the very worst of circumstances, the very best of us emerged. What the terrorists struck at in Bali was something they could never defeat: the great fabric of dreams, ideals, compassion, humanity, and fairness that make us all who we are. My thoughts are with everyone gathered in Bali for this sad anniversary. I know that grief, while it may soften with time, does not fade. So I hold you in my heart today and always. The Honourable Anthony Albanese, Prime Minister of Australia.
Thank you, Ambassador Williams. We will now hear some reflections and readings from 3 speakers who were impacted by the 2002 Bali bombings. AFP Superintendent Mick Travers, APM retired, served with the AFP for 41 years before retiring in 2021. He deployed to Bali in the first wave of AFP first responders on Sunday, 13th of October 2002. From 2002 until 2007, Mick worked as part of the AFP's Forensic Counter-Terrorism team, working with the AFP's partner agencies across Southeast Asia. I welcome Superintendent Mick Travers to the lectern.
Salamat pagi, good morning. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge all the dignitaries here today and thank them for attending this morning's service. But to everyone here, I want to acknowledge that in some way the events of 20 years ago may have impacted on you. With my other AFP colleagues, I was advised about 12 hours after the bombings that I'd be travelling here to Bali. When I boarded that RAAF aircraft that afternoon to bring me here, I tried to imagine what I was heading into. I couldn't have never imagined how responding to the events here in Bali would have shaped my policing career and more broadly my life. On arrival later that night, we were taken from the plane to the medevac area at the airport that had been set up as we were mistakenly thought to be medical personnel that were coming here to assist. There were many victims there being treated and cared for by both Balinese, Australians and many other nationalities. And I was really glad actually at that time that I was actually law enforcement and not a medical practitioner, because you could just see how difficult it was for all those involved. After a very uneasy night with little sleep, the next morning we travelled to Sangla Hospital. It was here that the full impact of the loss of life was evident and hit home to me. I had been in the AFP for over 20 years, but had never experienced a tragedy on this scale. But amongst the sadness at the hospital, I also began to see the positives of humanity. The Balinese people working hard hand in hand with the medical staff and volunteers from across the world and their friends for helping those who had survived. And moved on to what was obviously a very long recovery. Within a few hours we had moved to the scene in Jalal Legian, a place I spent many long hours every day for the next 3 weeks. I found it almost incomprehensible that someone would do this and in doing so affect so many others. When was presented by the evidence of my forensic colleagues, I began to understand the awful truth of what had occurred on that previous Saturday night. Working at the scene was difficult, both physically and mentally. There were many nationalities waiting to assist our Indonesian police colleagues with the investigation. It was also here that I had many positive experiences. The assistance given to us by the Indonesian National Police, by the local Balinese community, including Brangbang Priyanto, who is here with us today, and his team of volunteers. It's something that I'll never forget. They had experienced the most horrible incident themselves and lost many friends and family, but they were here to help us in any way they could. We worked alongside them and achieved the results we could have never done by ourselves. Working with our colleagues from the INP, foreign law enforcement colleagues that had travelled to Bali, we spent many hours working to recover the evidence at the scene that would help both identify the victims and prosecute the offenders. Whilst extremely difficult, it was also a positive experience. No matter what country these law enforcement members were from, no matter whether they were investigators, forensic members, post-blast analysts, laboratory experts, or working to identify the victims, we worked as one team to achieve the outcomes. Bali will always hold a significant memory for me. Some are difficult to remember, some bring a smile to my face when thinking about the warmth of the Balinese people and the lifelong friends that I've made here. This is a beautiful island with wonderful people, and it should always be remembered as such. I hope that you take away positive experiences from your time back here in Bali. I know it will be difficult. For many of that is perhaps what those who are no longer with us or can't be with us today would want. Terima kasih.
Thank you, Superintendent. Ms. Anki Septiana, OAM, is a former locally engaged staff member at the Australian Consulate General in Bali. Ms. Septiana was here at the time of the 2002 Bali bombings. She provided consular assistance to the victims of the Bali bombings and their families. She is now working at the Australian Embassy in Jakarta. I welcome Ms. Septiana to the lectern to read a poem.
May time soften your pain. In times of darkness, love sees. In times of silence, love hears. In times of doubt, love hopes. In times of sorrow, love heals. And in all times, love remembers. May time soften the pain until all that remains is the warmth of the memories and the love. Semoga waktu meringankan kepedihanmu. Dikala gelap, cinta melihat. Dikala hening, cinta mendengar. Dikala ragu, cinta berharap. Dikala duka, cinta menyembuhkan. Dan di sepanjang waktu, cinta mengenang. Semoga waktu meringankan kepedihanmu. Hingga yang tertinggal hanya kehangatan kenangan dan cinta. Terima kasih.
Thank you, Ms. Septiana. Mr. Andrew Charby was in the Sari Club in Bali on 12th of October 2002 and suffered severe injuries in the bombing. He will be sharing some thoughts today. I welcome Mr. Charby to the lectern.
Well, as you can see, I'm not an athlete. I'm not a public speaker. I'm not even a storyteller. But I just want to tell you what happened in Bali, share my thoughts, my memories of Bali then, and my thoughts and memories now. Before I present to you, I'd like to dedicate my talk to the 88 Australians that died in Bali and over 200 people that never made it home to their families, and I dedicate my talk to them. So welcome and thank you for sharing how much I love Bali. Bali is a beautiful place to holiday and enjoy many sports and activities. I've just returned from 3 days diving into London and it was magnificent. It's a beautiful place to scuba dive and it's a beautiful country. Bali is paradise and Bali also loves Australia. The people of Bali also welcome us unconditionally every time I arrive here. So I'm eternally grateful to my family, close friends, and to all levels of government that enable us to commemorate 20 years here together. And I respect the families and individuals affected by the Bali bombings. I'm forever grateful to our first responders, many bystanders that issued first aid without self-preservation and saved many of us, our government in transporting and medically evacuating us to Darwin, saving many lives including mine, my entire family, my sister Fiona here is present today, our servicemen and women and my digger mate Tony McKay in the audience. We thank you all for your service. The International, Indonesian and Bali Council Government. So I was granted a second chance at life and I make every minute count. I was often told that my life was spared for a reason and how lucky I am. Yes, I am lucky. I made it home and I will honour that privilege. So in closing, I wish to share a paragraph that I repeat to myself when I need strength, and it's written by Anne Landis. So if I was to give the most useful advice for all humanity, it would be this: to expect trouble as an inevitable part of life, and when it comes, hold your head up high and repeat to yourself that I'm bigger than you cannot defeat me, and then repeat to yourself the most comforting words of all, that this too shall pass. Terima kasih. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Charby. Thank you, Superintendent Travers, Ms. Septiana and Mr. Charby for sharing your experiences and for being here today. We will now hold a minute's silence to reflect on and remember the lives lost and those injured in the Bali bombings. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Please be seated. We will now witness the laying of the wreaths and flowers at the memorial for those who wish to participate. Mr. Ben Walker will be presenting the wreaths today. In 2002, Mr. Ben Walker was posted to the RAF base Darwin as a communications operator. In October 2002, Ben participated in the aeromedical evacuation of those impacted by the Bali bombings and repatriated to Australia via the Royal Darwin Hospital. Mr. Walker will be assisted by those who are representing the Australian Defence Force, including those who took part in the evacuation operation. Thank you for performing this role today. I invite Assistant Minister Watts, Mr. Gosling, Wakil Gubernur Bapak Chok Aceh, Ambassador Williams, Consul General Griffin, British Deputy Ambassador Matt Downing, the representative for Kapolda, and AFP Deputy Commissioner Mark Pointing, Consul General of Japan Harumi Katsumata, Squadron Leader Alexander Smith, and Warrant Class 2 Dean Rinkney to move to the Memorial Garden to lay wreaths. Our ushers will guide you to the garden. The laying of the wreaths will be shown on the screens here. There will be an opportunity for others to lay wreaths and flowers in the Memorial Garden shortly. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. If you'd like to remain seated, the video will shortly come through on the screens here, and then I will speak again. Thanks. Thank you, everyone. There will now be a morning tea served in the Bali, the building beside you. Please let our catering staff know if you have any dietary requirements. I would also like to invite families of those who passed away, survivors, first responders, and anyone else who wishes to lay a wreath or flower at the memorial to do so throughout the morning tea. I would like to invite anyone who wishes to add to our Kamasan painting boards located in the carport of the consulate. Paints, brushes and markers will be available. You are also invited to sign the condolence book located beside the Kamasan boards. For those who wish to attend, there will be 2 commemorative events open to the public today at the memorial at Ground Zero in Kuta. One event, organised by the Asana Dewata Foundation, will commence at 5 p.m, and another, organised by Densus 88 of the Indonesian government, will commence at 10:30 p.m. The Memorial Garden here at the Australian Consulate General will be open for private reflection and remembrance between 1 p.m. and 4 p.m. today. Thank you all once again for being here in Bali today to remember, to reflect and to heal. Thank you. Terima kasih.